How to repair your hydraulic transmission jack VLT6. It is always a good idea to check if the release valve is closing properly. Make sure the release pedal has a 1 to 2 mm play. Start by loosening the cylinder nut and then carefully remove nut and cylinder assembly. Be very careful not to damage the cylinder parts and to keep them clean. Next step is to fix the reservoir tube in a vise or likewise. Remove the bolt holding the rear leg. Loosen the console, push it aside and disconnect the hose assembly by pushing the small red ring while pulling the hose. Remove the console. Loosen the bolts holding the quick lift pedal in place. Then remove the bracket with the quick lift pedal and the release pedal. Next step is to remove the oil plug and drain the jack for oil. Loosen the cylinder bottom. We use a fibre hammer and special tool that is available on demand. Then remove it. Use a fibre hammer to loosen the reservoir cover. Then remove the cover. Be careful not to damage the parts. Remove the reservoir tube. Remove the bottom of the reservoir. Make sure you handle all parts carefully and keep them clean. If you need to repair the cylinders, start by fixing the cylinder assembly in a vise with alu claws. Loosen the small cylinder nut and remove the small middle cylinder and the ram. Repeat with the large middle cylinder. Use sandpaper to grind the end of the cylinders. Make sure the parts are clean and dry. Remove scraper rings and seals on all parts. Clean the parts with a detergent and make sure everything is completely clean and without scratches or rust. Refit scraper rings and seals on all parts. Refit the cylinder nuts using plenty of grease inside, not on the thread. Fix the large middle cylinder in the vise and carefully refit the small middle cylinder. Apply a bit of Loctite to secure the nut and apply grease on the O-ring. Make sure to tighten the cylinder nut well. Make sure all parts run freely. Repeat the process with the ram. Replace the O-rings on the bottom flange. Make sure the reservoir cover is without scratches and rust before you refit new O-rings. Make sure the cylinder bottom is dry and clean before you refit a new O-ring. When you are ready to reassemble the transmission jack, start by refitting the reservoir cover on the cylinder tube. Use plenty of grease on the parts. Next step is to refit the reservoir tube. Apply more grease before you refit the bottom flange and the pump. Use a fibre hammer to carefully push it in place. Refit the cylinder bottom and tighten it well. Refit the bolts holding the legs. Refit the bracket with the quick lift pedal and the release pedal. Refit the bolts holding the quick lift pedal in place. Make sure it has a 1 to 2 mm play. Refit the console. Refit the hose and make sure to push it fully into the quick couplings. Next step is to refit the cylinder assembly. Apply a bit of Loctite to secure the large nut and apply grease on the O-ring. Refit the cylinder assembly in the cylinder tube. Take care not to damage the parts. Use a fibre hammer to make sure that the large cylinder nut is fully tightened. Remove the oil plug and refill the jack with oil. Correct oil level is just below the filler plug with the jack in its lowest position. Refit the oil plug. Finally, you need to bleed the system. Raise the jack until both middle cylinders are fully extended. Loosen the Allen screw on the side of the bushing and remove the bushing. Remove the bleeding screw on the small cylinder. Release and lower the piston rod until it is fully down. Raise the piston rod a bit, then use a screwdriver to keep the piston down and pump slowly using the pedal until pure oil emerges. Refit the bleeding screw and tighten it. Refit the bushing and tighten it with the Allen screw. Finally, refit the saddle and test that everything is working correctly.